In Vietnam, sometimes the worst thing that could happen to an American soldier was to survive a firefight, but not make it back. Because when a man was captured by the Viet Cong, he didn't just become a prisoner. He became part of a hidden system that ran deep into the jungles. And for years, what happened to these men was beyond disturbing. The earliest American prisoners taken by Viet Cong forces go back to the very start of U.S. involvement. In the early 1960s, the United States was still testing the waters in Vietnam. Back then, it wasn't a full-scale war yet. Most Americans on the ground were military advisors, Green Berets, and small support teams working closely with South Vietnamese units. They were spread out across rural areas, especially in the Mekong Delta, which was one of the most difficult regions to control. It was a maze of rivers, swamps, rice paddies, and thick vegetation. For the Viet Cong, this was a perfect battlefield. They knew every path, every canal, every village, and they used that knowledge to quietly surround and isolate American personnel without being seen. By 1963, tensions had already built up. The Viet Cong were becoming more organized, and their attacks were getting bolder. One of the key moments came on October 29, 1963, when a group of American Special Forces soldiers and South Vietnamese troops were operating near the village of Ap Bac in the Mekong Delta. This area had already seen heavy fighting earlier that year, and it was known to be dangerous. During this operation, Viet Cong forces launched a sudden and well-planned ambush. They hit fast, surrounded the group, and cut off escape routes. Captain Humbert Roque Versace, known as Rocky, was right in the middle of this. He had already built a reputation as someone who refused to back down. During the attack, he was wounded, but kept fighting until he was physically overpowered. Along him, Sergeant Kenneth Rohraback was also captured, along with 2 South Vietnamese soldiers. The Viet Cong didn't waste time. Within minutes, they stripped them of weapons, tied them up, and started moving them out of the area before any American rescue could arrive. Versace's behavior in captivity quickly made him stand out. He refused to follow orders, refused to bow his head, and even tried to escape more than once. In one instance, he reportedly attempted to overpower guards despite being weakened and injured. Because of this, the Viet Cong began treating him differently. He was separated more often, guarded more closely, and punished more harshly. But he didn't change. Even during early interrogations, he refused to give useful information and openly challenged his captors. Over time, the Viet Cong realized he couldn't be controlled in the way that they wanted. They often tried to use prisoners for propaganda, forcing them to speak against the United States or support their cause. Versace refused every time. This made him a problem for them, not an asset. By September 1965, after nearly 2 years of harsh captivity, constant resistance, and repeated attempts to break him, the Viet Cong made a decision. He was executed. The exact details were not immediately known, but later accounts confirmed he was killed after continued refusal to cooperate. His story didn't end there. In 2002, decades after the war, the U.S. government officially recognized what he endured. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in captivity, making him one of the very few soldiers honored specifically for resistance as a prisoner. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August had pushed the United States deeper into the war. Within months, troop numbers increased, and American soldiers were no longer just advisors. They were actively fighting, patrolling, and entering areas that were heavily influenced or completely controlled by the Viet Cong. But the problem was, this wasn't normal war. There were no clear front lines. American troops could move through a village during the day and think it was safe, only to be attacked from the same village at night. The Viet Cong avoided large battles unless they had the advantage. Instead, they focused on ambushes, traps, and quick strikes. These ambushes were carefully planned. The Viet Cong would watch patrol patterns, study movements, and choose locations where escape was difficult. Thick jungle, narrow trails, river crossings. These were perfect spots. When the attack came, it was sudden, gunfire from multiple directions, sometimes followed by explosives. The goal was to confuse, scatter, and isolate. That's how many captures happened. A soldier separated from his unit, even for a few minutes, could be surrounded. If he was wounded and couldn't move, his chances of being captured went up quickly. The Viet Cong moved fast after an ambush, grabbing anyone they could and disappearing before backup arrived. One of the most detailed cases from this period is James N. Rowe. In December 1964, Rowe was part of a small advisory team operating in the Mekong Delta. His unit was ambushed by Viet Cong fighters. The attack was quick and overwhelming. Rowe was captured alive and immediately taken away. Right after being taken, he was tied up and blindfolded. He couldn't see where he was going, and that was intentional. The Viet Cong didn't want prisoners to understand their routes or locations. He was forced to march almost immediately. These weren't short movements. These could last for days, sometimes longer, with very little rest. Food during these marches was almost nothing. Usually just small handfuls of rice, sometimes not even enough to stop hunger. Water came from rivers, swamps, or standing pools. Many of these sources were dirty, and drinking from them made the prisoners sick. Rowe became ill early on, dealing with stomach problems and weakness. He later explained that these marches were not just about moving prisoners to a camp. They were designed to weaken them as much as possible before they even arrived. By the time a prisoner reached a camp, he was already exhausted, dehydrated, and mentally shaken. This made him easier to control. Rowe also noticed how organized the movement was. Even though the Viet Cong operated in small units, they had a system for passing prisoners along. One group would move him for a while, then hand him over to another group deeper in controlled territory. This kept him constantly disoriented and prevented any chance of escape. By the time Rowe reached his first camp, he was already in bad condition. He'd lost weight, he was sick, and had no idea where he was. And that was exactly how the Viet Cong wanted it. Because once the prisoner arrived, the next phase began. For that, the Viet Cong had already built a system. But these weren't large prison complexes like people might imagine. These camps were small, hidden, and constantly moving. Most camps were built deep in the jungle, far away from roads or open areas. They were designed to be invisible from the air. Structures were made from bamboo, leaves, and mud. From above, they looked like part of the forest. If American planes flew over, they wouldn't see anything unusual. Inside these camps, conditions were extremely basic. James Rowe described being kept in bamboo cages that were so small he could barely move properly. In some cases, prisoners had to sit or lie in the same position for long periods. He was often chained by the ankles, sometimes to a wooden beam, or directly to the ground. Guards were always nearby, watching closely. Food remained one of the biggest problems. Prisoners were usually given 2 small portions of rice a day. Sometimes the rice was mixed with leaves or whatever else was available. Protein was almost non-existent. This led to rapid weight loss. Rowe dropped to around 100 pounds, which was dangerously low for an adult male. Malnutrition just made everything worse. The body became weaker, wounds healed slowly, and resistance to disease dropped. Malaria was common because of the jungle environment and constant mosquito exposure. Dysentery spread through contaminated water and poor hygiene. Many prisoners suffered from both at the same time. Medical care was inconsistent. Sometimes a Viet Cong medic would try to treat prisoners using basic methods, often involving local plants or simple tools. But in many cases, there was no real treatment at all. Prisoners had to rely on each other for help, cleaning wounds as best they could, or sharing small amounts of food. Living conditions also meant constant exposure to insects, rats, and harsh weather. During the rainy season, everything became wet and muddy. Sleeping on the ground meant being soaked for hours. In the dry season, heat and dehydration became serious problems. But even with all this physical suffering, the Viet Cong were focused on something else as well. They understood that controlling the body was only half the job. The real goal was to control the mind. And that happened with interrogation. It usually started within hours or days, depending on how quickly the Viet Cong could move him to a secure location. At first, the questioning was direct and focused. They wanted clear military information. For a guerrilla force like the Viet Cong, even small details could make a big difference in planning attacks or avoiding them. Rowe later described how these early interrogations often mixed fear and confusion. Prisoners were already exhausted from capture and forced marches, so they were in no condition to resist for long periods. At the start, the Viet Cong sometimes used physical force to test how far a prisoner would go. Rowe explained that he was tied in painful positions, sometimes with his arms pulled behind his back, or forced to sit in ways that caused intense strain. If he refused to answer, he was beaten. But something changed over time. The Viet Cong realized that constant violence didn't always get the results they wanted. A prisoner who was badly beaten might shut down completely, or die, and that made him useless. So instead of relying only on force, they began using pressure in a slower, more calculated way. They started talking more, not less. Interrogators would sit with prisoners for long sessions, sometimes hours, asking the same questions again and again, looking for small changes in answers. They also worked on the prisoner's mind. They told them that the United States was losing the war, especially after setbacks in the early years. They claimed that American forces were being pushed out and that their government had already accepted defeat. It was meant to isolate the prisoner mentally, to make him feel cut off from everything he knew. Sleep deprivation became another tool. Prisoners were sometimes kept awake for long periods, questioned late at night, or woken up repeatedly. When a person is tired enough, thinking clearly becomes almost impossible. And that's when mistakes happen. And that's what interrogators were waiting for. At the same time, they pushed for propaganda. Prisoners were asked to write statements saying the war was wrong or that they regretted being there. Some were told to speak these statements out loud while being recorded. These recordings then would be used for broadcasts or political pressure. For the Viet Cong, this was just as valuable as military information. By the middle of the 1960s, the Viet Cong had started turning captivity into something more organized. Interrogation didn't stop, but it became part of a larger system that they called re-education. This wasn't education in a normal sense. It was about changing how prisoners saw the war and their place in it. Prisoners were forced to attend long sessions where guards or political officers explained their version of the conflict. They described the United States as a foreign power trying to control Vietnam. They said the war was unjust and that American soldiers were being used for the wrong reasons. These talks could go on for hours, sometimes every day, especially if the camp was stable enough to hold regular routines. Prisoners had to sit, listen, and often respond. They were asked questions about what they believed and why they were in Vietnam. If their answers didn't match what the Viet Cong wanted to hear, the pressure increased. They might be told to write essays explaining their thoughts, then rewrite them again and again until the wording matched what was expected. This constant repetition had a purpose. It forced prisoners to think about the same ideas over and over. Even if they didn't believe it, they had to engage with it. Over time, that could wear down resistance, especially when combined with hunger, isolation, and exhaustion. Guards watched reactions closely. They paid attention to who resisted, who stayed quiet, and who started to cooperate. Those who openly resisted were punished. Punishment didn't always mean beatings. Often it was more controlled, less food, longer periods of isolation, or being kept in more uncomfortable positions for longer times. These methods were effective because they didn't leave obvious marks, but still caused serious suffering. Controlling communication was another key part of the system. Prisoners were often kept apart or only allowed limited contact. The Viet Cong understood that if prisoners formed strong bonds, they could support each other and resist more effectively. So they tried to break that connection by separating them or keeping them under constant watch. But prisoners found ways around this. Some used simple tapping systems, knocking on walls or bamboo structures to send messages, letter by letter. Others whispered at night, when guards were less alert. These small moments of connection became extremely important. They reminded prisoners that they were not alone, and that helped them hold on mentally. Over time, survival depended on adaptation. Prisoners learned when to stay silent, when to respond, and how to avoid drawing too much attention. Some pretended to agree during sessions just to avoid punishment, while still holding on to their real beliefs internally. Not every American captured by the Viet Cong made it out alive. The conditions inside these camps were already harsh enough to kill without any direct action. A prisoner weakened by months of hunger and illness didn't need much more to reach the point where the body simply gave up. Execution was used in specific situations. If a prisoner tried to escape and was caught, the punishment could be immediate. The Viet Cong could not risk someone finding their way back and revealing camp locations. There were many cases where the full story was never known. During the war, hundreds of American soldiers were listed as missing in action. Some were known to have been captured, but what happened after that was unclear. The nature of guerrilla warfare made tracking prisoners extremely difficult. Camps moved constantly, units operated independently, and records were rarely kept in a way that survived the war. This meant that some prisoners simply disappeared. No confirmed death, no confirmed survival. Just a gap in the record that was never fully filled. For families in the United States, this created a different kind of suffering. They didn't know if their loved one was alive or dead. Years could pass with no answers. Letters didn't come. Official updates were limited. The uncertainty became part of daily life. In January 1968, during the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, the Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive. This was not a small attack. It was a massive, coordinated effort across South Vietnam, hitting cities, towns, and military bases at the same time. This sudden escalation had a direct impact on prisoners. As fighting spread and American forces responded heavily, many Viet Cong camps were at risk of being discovered. The solution was movement. Prisoners were forced to relocate again, often with little warning. These movements were fast and difficult, especially for those already weakened by years of captivity. Some prisoners were transferred out of Viet Cong control entirely and handed over to North Vietnamese forces. This shift was important. The North Vietnamese had more structured prison systems, especially in the north of the country. But getting there wasn't easy. These transfers often included long journeys through jungle routes, including parts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This network of paths ran through dense terrain, stretching from North Vietnam into the south. It was used to move troops, weapons, and now prisoners. Conditions during these journeys were extremely harsh. Prisoners had to walk long distances with very little food. Many were already sick or injured. There was no real medical care during these movements. If someone fell behind, the group could not always stop. Weak prisoners often didn't survive these transfers. At the same time, the importance of prisoners was changing. As the war continued and international attention grew, prisoners became more than just sources of information. They became political tools. Their existence could influence negotiations, public opinion, and pressure between governments. This meant that in some cases, prisoners were kept alive not just for interrogation, but for their value in future talks. Their survival became tied to something bigger than the camps they were held in. By this point, the war had entered a new phase, and for the prisoners still alive, it meant that their fate was no longer only in the hands of their captors in the jungle. It was now connected to the outcome of the entire war itself. James Rowe remained in captivity for 5 years. On December 31st, 1968, during a helicopter rescue operation, Rowe managed to break free after killing a guard. He was rescued by U.S. forces. Other prisoners were not as lucky. Some remained in captivity until the end of the war. Some never returned. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. As part of the agreement, American prisoners of war were released in an operation known as Operation Homecoming. Many of the prisoners released were held in North Vietnam, but some had originally been captured by the Viet Cong. The men who returned were physically damaged. Many were severely underweight. Some had untreated injuries that never healed properly. the psychological impact was even deeper. Years of isolation, fear, and uncertainty left lasting scars. For families of missing soldiers, the end of the war didn't always bring closure. Many remained unaccounted for. Their stories were never fully known.